will be recorded. Can I also welcome any members of the public and press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not speak or participate? I would also like to welcome members of the Street Scene and Engineering Scrutiny Committee who were invited to attend today's meeting. Can I please remind you all to switch your phone to silent for the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols of remote meetings which have been previously circulated? Namely, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either by the chat function or by raising your electronic hand by team? I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When making a question, can you please indicate which page number you are referring to? Okay, the first item on the agenda today is to do a roll call. I am Councillor Saifur Rahman, the chair, and I am present. I will now call on Chloe, the Democratic Service Officer, to take the roll call. Please, Chloe.
Thank you, Chair. I've marked you as present. Councillor Sharon Freegard.
Present.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
Present.
Councillor Nigel Hunt. I can see he's put in the chat that he's present. Yeah. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Chloe.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Present.
Councillor Simon Noyle.
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Yes, present.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
Present.
Councillor Rydia Maisen.
Yeah, present all.
Councillor Suzanne Patterson. Councillor Suzanne Patterson.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Corey. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nat Purcell. Councillor Sheila Penry.
Present.
Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
And Councillor Aaron Wilcock.
Present, no chair.
I'll now move on to the street scene members who are invited to attend today. Councillor Robert Wood.
Present.
Councillor Howard Aubrey.
Present.
Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy. Councillor Scott Jones. Councillor Adam McGrath. Councillor Christopher Jones. And Councillor Rosalind Davis. Here, I'll now move on to Cabinet members. Councillor Edward Latham.
Yeah, I'm here, Chloe, thank you.
Councillor Leanne Jones. Councillor Leanne Jones? No. Councillor Carol Clement Williams.
Apologies, she's got Chloe.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Harvey.
Here, Chloe, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Doreen Jones.
Here, Chloe.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Here, Chloe.
Councillor Peter Rees.
Here, Chloe.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Chloe.
And I've had apologies from Councillor Annette Wingrave. So officers, Karen Jones.
Here, Chloe.
Harold Jenkins.
Present.
Andrew Thomas.
Present.
Andrew Jarrett.
Yeah, I'm present, Chloe.
Nicola Pierce.
Present, Chloe.
Craig Griffiths.
Present, Chloe.
Sheena Rees. Sheena? Nope.
She's not here, Chloe.
Okay, no worries, thank you. Hugh Jones. Aaron Philo Harris.
Present, Chloe.
Dave Griffiths.
Sorry, was that Craig or
Dave Griffiths.
Yeah, present, Chloe.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Peter Jackson.
Present, Chloe.
And Jane Woodman Ralph.
Present.
Have I missed anyone?
No, Chloe, but I'm here now. Councillor Leanne Jones.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Jones. I'll mark you as present. I think that's everyone, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chloe. Moving on to item number 2 then, which is Chair's announcement. We have chosen to scrutinise item 6, 7 and item 9 on the Cabinet Board agenda, we have decided that we will not be scrutinizing any item on the Cabinet Finance sub-agenda, as we are happy with the recommendation within the report. Moving on to item number 3 on the scrutiny agenda, declaration of interest. Can member please indicate whether you have any declaration in relation to the items that we have chosen to scrutinize? Sonia, Councillor Reynolds, did you have a declaration of interest?
Thank you, Saif. I have a declaration of interest to make on item 6 as a trustee of Canolvan Mardy, and as the fact that my councillor money paid for our initial transport developments in the valley.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Moving on then, item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes needs to be approved today. As you can see, we have few sets of minutes. Has anyone got any comments on the accuracy of any of the attached minutes? Okay, I see none. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder to approve the minutes dated 24th of February 2021, please? I need a proposer and a seconder.
Okay.
Okay.
Seconder.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I please have a proposer and seconder to approve the minutes dated 8th of March 2021, please?
I move, Chair.
Second, Chair.
Thank you very much. And finally, can I have a proposer and a seconder to approve the minutes dated 16th of March 2021, please?
Move, Chair.
Seconder, please.
I second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, item number 5 then, next, pre-decision scrutiny. As previously mentioned, we have decided to scrutinize items 6, 7 and 9 on the Cabinet paper. So if I could take you all to the Cabinet agenda, please. Okay, so the first item we've decided to scrutinize is the proposed future funding model for community transport. I believe Mr. David Griffiths and Mr. Peter Jackson will be taking this report. Members have read the report, just to let the officers know, but is there anything else you would like to add before I go to questions?
No, Chair. If members are comfortable to go straight into the questions, Peter and I are happy to take questions around what's proposed here today.
Okay, I can see an indication here. Let me just check. 2 seconds.
Chair, I just would like to ask a question, that's all.
All right, okay, no problem. Can I call up Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a quick linked question. The first is just to clarify that the new application process mentioned in the report means that any community transport organisation or community car scheme within the county borough will be able to apply now, even if they haven't been in receipt of funding previously. I'm aware of in my own area, for instance, a community car scheme made inquiries some time ago about possible assistance, but at the time the funding was restricted to a certain number of organisations. So I'm just wondering now, will it be open to all legitimate organisations? And linked to that, as mentioned in the report, the recently adopted strategy of Welsh Government does encourage this type of organisation as an alternative to improve the range of public transport available. But is there any indication that Welsh Government will be making any additional funds available to local authorities to support these organisations? Because otherwise, it'll mean that a fairly restricted pool is being stretched further. You know, if we treat other organisations fairly and bring them into the funding regime.
Okay.
Mr. Griffiths?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, Councillor Llewellyn, on the first point, the scheme will be open to all organisations that operate within Neath Talbot Council. I think it was fair to say they were open to other community transport organisations previously, and that they would only have been not continued with funding if there were queries or concerns around the delivery of the services. So yes, just to confirm, it will be open to all organisations. In terms of the second part of your question, in terms of the Welsh Government's strategy, at the moment, it's clear that they are supportive of schemes of this nature that are sustainable and delivered locally. However, they are reviewing all of the funding streams at the moment in terms of transport. And we are yet to find out the detail of that. I anticipate that there'll be continued funding, and as you quite rightly said, these organisations need support, but we do want to try to get people to be operating on a more sustainable basis also. I don't know if Peter, do you want to add anything to the second point on the Welsh Government's funding mechanisms?
Yeah, at the moment, the BSSG funding, which this is part of, comes down to the region. As a region, we have to spend between 5 and 10% on community transport. Every year there's a little underspend, which is part of the reason why we wanted to do this. Last year it was a bit more than we thought, and this year we anticipate with COVID there'll be more money available, so it makes it easier to disaggregate what we've got and to try and encourage these schemes. You know, sort of in the last 3 years, I think we've had 2 or 3 new schemes set up in Neath, and if they don't have some sort of support, they might just fail. You know, the latest one is FAN in Neath, Family and Neighbourhood in Neath, you know, and they've got an electric car, so they are going far more sustainable as well. I'd like to think that they will look at community transport, because we do have the integrated transport section within Welsh Government, and they are looking at alternative ways of getting people to the main bus routes, because it's not always feasible to put a bus into a small location. We might only be picking 2 or 3 people up in a day, where a small community transport operation would be far more sustainable. But as for funding, I can't guarantee there'll be more coming.
Thank you. Councillor Llewellyn, do you have a supplementary question you wish to ask?
No, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt, please, next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Pretty much similar to Alan, but I'm more about sustainability and management that David and Peter have alluded to. And the crossover, you mentioned getting to routes to catch the main buses, which is admirable and important. Rural wards, of course, as we've heard many times over the years, struggle more than the towns and the cities. But I just wondered that you mentioned the money may not be available. So I just understand about sustainability, where if the money isn't available and these fail, where does that leave those relying on them? Because the other issue I have is, and Peter or David can obviously correct me, I don't know if Traws Cymru, if that's how you pronounce it, are still giving free transport on weekends in particular areas, which again doesn't really help. It helps the commuter, but it doesn't help the sustainability when other bus companies are competing. And also, if community transport, and I'm a big fan of community transport, but it's not one or the other, if that affects the main companies like First Cymru, who eventually then suspend routes or change time slots, that's going to have a huge detrimental effect if the community transport doesn't succeed. So there's a lot of management, a lot of talks, a lot of obviously funding needed. I just wondered what David and Peter discussions are having in the transport system to make sure that, or as best they could, to make sure that the transport is still there, because a lot of people obviously rely on it so much for so many reasons, and again, especially in the rural wards, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, if I could come back. Yes, Councillor Hunt, we have been speaking to First, and they're quite prepared to work with the community transport operators. They have in some areas where they've allowed interchangeability of tickets, which is what we'd like to see more of, encourage, actually. But if we look at community transport as an addition to the main core bus network, I think what we're looking at is for community transport to fill the isolated gaps where you don't have main bus services, which is why I know when we've had First in meetings with us previously, that they'd like that because it'd take them to the main bus routes rather than compete against the bus services.
Could I come in, Chair, if you don't mind?
Yes,
just perhaps putting it into a sort of national perspective. The Welsh Government and Transport for Wales, as you'll be aware, are doing a complete review of the transport system and the network. Now, obviously, they'll be looking at primary and secondary routes and connecting key communities. But from what the information that I've seen, that they see that community transport and demand responsive transport is that they're recognizing that it's a much bigger key part of maintaining connectivity to communities. And we must remember it's not just rural communities either that have isolated pockets. We've actually got them within our urban built up areas as well. So they certainly now recognise, I'm not sure that they did previously, and that might be a bit disrespectful, but they've certainly taken on board that demand responsive transport is going to be a big part of the transport solution going forward. And with that, I believe that money has to flow as well to support that, but time will tell on that, Councillor.
Chair, just briefly, if I may. Yeah, thank you for that, David and Peter. The point I'm trying to make is that where are you in the bigger picture, talking in these meeting places, so that the management of it goes well? Because as I mentioned, Traws Cymru, that is the Welsh Government own service,
yes,
are sort of running bus services at a detrimental effect to the community transport and to the bus operators. So, you know, if the Welsh Government are providing the funding, and hopefully it'll continue, then they must be mindful of the damage they may be doing. As I said, for commuters, it's not because they love a free trip, but it's not so conducive to those bus companies that may need to rely on the passengers. You know the old famous saying, Chair, use it or lose it. Well, I'm not a fan of that, but that is the point I'm trying to make, and it does need financing. So sorry, Dave, you didn't quite cover that bit. So sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. In terms of where we are at the moment, obviously there's been task forces within Welsh Government. I sat on the task force last year when I was chair of the region. My colleague in Pembrokeshire is now sitting on that task force group this year, but we've been very much working as a region on the response to Welsh Government and their consultants in terms of that piece of work. They've appointed a consultant that's been meeting with our transport officers here at Neath Talbot, and Peter can tell you a little bit more about that. But they've met every Southwest regional council's officers, where we've been feeding back and inputting our feedback to their initial piece of work. and we've identified concerns within that. So we are hopeful that they will take those on board. So there's been quite a lot of work going on. I'm hopeful within the next few months or so that we'll be able to bring back to you the findings of that review, so that we can share that with members, and then we can further have discussions around those proposals. So it's work in progress, if I'm honest. It's not a quick fix. There's a lot of work to be undertaken, but most importantly, and I think leaders have met with the Transport Minister and the WLGA, but they're certainly recognising now that a central model controlled up in Cardiff or via Transport for Wales is not necessarily the best model, and they're very they've accepted that they really do need local councils' input into the development of those services. So I'm buoyed by that. I'm reassured from that if they stand by their word that we have a better transport system for our communities. So Peter, I don't know if you want to say anything further about the Traws Cymru service. I'm not sure if it is still free. It was all year round. I don't know if it's just weekends now. And if you wanted to say anything about the work that you've been inputting with Brendan to Arab Associates.
Yeah. We've been working with, as David just said, the consultants that TFW have employed called Arabs, and they've got a very complicated system which we can get up on screen, and we are going back and questioning some of the things they're suggesting. As you know, for me personally, if we went back to 1999 and put the buses as they were then, we'd have a perfect system. They've only got a limited budget, and yes, we are working with them. The Traws Cymru, I don't think they are free anymore. It was supposed to be for a 2-week period, which got extended for a 3-month period, which got extended even further. I think all the operators and the Confederation of Passenger Transport put complaints in about that because they were distracting people off the pay-in network, although they did get reimbursed for any loss of revenue. I don't know what's going to happen with Traws Cymru in the future, you know, whether they're going to introduce the same for the Bus Users Week this year. But we are looking at everything. And once I come out of this meeting, I'll be going to another one with Brendan, as Dave said, to go through their Padaris system to see where they put in buses and what they're suggesting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Susan Paddison, please. Next.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is a little bit off the wall regarding bus services, but I've been talking recently to carers who have to travel quite large distances to look after their dependent loved ones, and the difficulties that they face just trying to get there. And if these people stop caring or cannot care, it's just going to add more problems to social services within the council. So I was just wondering if there has been any talks of asking Welsh Government's social services type budgets to put a little hand in, because if these people can't get to where they need to be, we will notice them being absent, and we don't want that at all. So has there been any discussion to go outside transport and ask for funding in any other stream?
Not as far as I'm aware, Councillor.
No, it's a good question, Councillor, and really
I might suggest that maybe officers try it. I mean, listen, you may not be able to get anywhere, but these things are all so linked in that we need to protect our carers even more so than the last year going forward, because more and more responsibilities will be added onto them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We can ask those questions through the strategic working group, but I think it's it's far-reaching, really, isn't it? We've always said that the bus services are quite restrictive. They end at 5:30 or 6:30 in the evening. So it's not just carers. It's whole sectors of our communities where we need to have better services, longer services into the evening, so that everybody has shared equity in terms of transport, not just in Neath Talbot, but nationally. So it is a challenge. I don't know as well, perhaps, if there's anything that the council here we can consider. I know that in pre-discussions on this, Andrew mentioned that we have got Andrew Jarrett mentioned that we have got schemes where we're also aware of those issues, and maybe we might be able to come forward with a solution that may help in that area, working in partnership with the community transport operators to sort of deal with that issue.
I'd be interested to hear the results of those conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Next, I have Councillor Robert Wood, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's on point 17 and 18, really, of the agenda. What I was interested to learn, really, is whether we are controlling or are going to control the amount of grants that could come in by putting a minimum requirement on of that grant. Because what I was sort of looking at is, if we had, for example, people applying in the thousands for grants, you know, for thousands of pounds of grants, then obviously that keeps the numbers down. If they apply in the £100 worth of grant, then obviously the numbers would increase. Now, on those points, it says that we are going to monitor the situation. Well, obviously, if a lot more operators apply for the grants, then there's going to be a lot more monitoring required. And I also wondered how, you know, that weighs up against the workload of officers concerning this. So really, the question is whether or not, you know, a minimum amount of grant is required in order to limit numbers.
Can I come in, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think what it is at the moment, you know, sort of we've got a fixed pot. As I said in the report, we do get surpluses some year. Normally they come in around about December, which means we're scrabbling round to find somebody, you know, sort of historically, you know, sort of it's been shop mobility or dancer or one of the others. But because we've got more people now, what we want to do is be slightly more equitable and let people apply for the grants. We've got the application form in here, which will mark on a criteria. And ideally, if they've got specific things we can measure against, then, you know, so if we get surplus grant, you know, we'll be asking them to re-inviting them to submit further claims during the year, you know, so long as we get surplus. If we get more grant going forward, if Welsh Government and Transport for Wales are serious in the way they're saying they want integrated responsive transport, they want community transport to pick it up, I would like to think that the grants will be further coming forward where we can be more generous with the money we've got to help the small community car schemes and bus schemes. But you're right, at the moment, you know, sort of somebody might come along and just say they need £150 for a filing cabinet to keep all this stuff, and somebody else might come along and say they need a car. And what we do is measure it on the merit and monitor it twice a year to see what they've actually done with the money so that it's accountable.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I have Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to indicate that, of course, there is already, as Peter knows, involvement between health and community transport in some cases where there is agreements and funding to use transport to hospital for some patients. But also during the pandemic and briefly prior to it, there were referrals from some of our own staff in social services to community transport for carers and the like to community transport to get them into their work and places. So I don't think the link into social services would be unprecedented.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds, for that. I don't have any anyone else on my list for questions or comment? So if you members, if you are happy with the recommendation which is going to Cabinet today, these are on pages 19 and 20. I'll need a proposal and a seconder to approve the recommendation to go to Cabinet.
Move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Paddison. Can I get a seconder, please?
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Okay, so we move on to the corporate plan 2021 to 2023. This report will be presented by Sheena Rees and Karen Furlow Harris. Can I ask officers, is there anything in addition you'd like to add to the report than what it is there? Or shall I go straight to questions?
Chair, if I can just take the opportunity to say that the draft plan in front of members today is slightly different to ones that have been presented in previous years, because it really is a position statement, and that's because of where we're at in terms of the ongoing response to the pandemic and in terms of where we're at in terms of planning for recovery. So the wellbeing objectives contained in the plan are the same as those that were agreed in 2017, so they remain unchanged, with only minor amendments being made to the work that underpins those wellbeing objectives. So I just wanted to say that at the start, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Chloe, can you advise, we have questions sent from Councillor Alan Llewellyn, who had to leave due to prior engagement. Were those questions been submitted to officers?
Yes, Chair. Would you like me to read them out for the committee?
Yes, please.
And then we can get officers to answer them then. Bear with me 1 second.
Thank you, Chloe.
So the email from Councillor Llewellyn said, the draft plan is understandably different this year in respect of the emphasis on pandemic recovery. As communities and community organisations have played an invaluable role in supporting people through the past year, can officers give more details of the consultation and engagement in arrangements referred to in the report? Thanks, Chair. That was everything.
That was everything. Okay. Karen Furlow, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're in the process of developing a comprehensive consultation and engagement plan. So we're working up that detail at the moment. But for this engagement, we're really splitting it into two parts. So from early July until the end of September, we plan to undertake what we call an involvement exercise with our key stakeholders, which involves our communities and our community organisations, to gather their feedback on our initial thoughts as to what our priorities for improvement will be. To help us do that, we've got a community of practice that's made up of about 40 or more colleagues from across the council, who all have responsibility for engagement in their roles that they undertake. So at the moment, that community of practice are updating a list of all the engagement channels we've got that we can tap into for that involvement exercise. So that should be completed this month. So that'll identify any gaps that we need to fill before we start that exercise. So for example, on that list will be organisations that represent businesses, carers, children, young people, older people, our partners, our residents, etc. So by the end of May, we should have a really comprehensive list of who we'll involve in that exercise. That will run until about the end of September. So during October, we'll analyse that feedback, which will then help us to develop a final set of priorities for improvement, which we will then put out for that 3-month formal consultation period, which will take us probably up until the end of February next year. And then following that consultation and any reiterations of those priorities for improvement we need to make, they will be then included in the corporate recovery plan, which we hope to publish next April, May.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Sharon Freegard, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. On page 79, it talks about the actions resulting from the child assessment to be implemented. I wondered what the actions were, when they are going to be implemented, if there is a finite timeline for that, and will they be reported back to this committee as an ongoing report, a monitoring report, or will it go to education?
Karen Furlow, please.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know the detail to answer that question. I don't know if colleagues do, or I'll find out for Councillor Freegard and come back to her outside the meeting.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Councillor Freegard, would you like a written response back, or would you be happy a phone call, a verbal response back to your question?
Either, whichever's easiest.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next, I have Councillor Nigel Hunt. I know Mr. Hunt, Councillor Hunt has already emailed the questions, and I believe officers have seen the questions. So what I'm going to do, yeah, I'll ask Nigel, is your Councillor Hunt, is your microphone working now?
Hello, Chair. I hope so.
Yes, I can hear you. Would you like to ask a question, please?
Yeah, right. So the question I'm asking is in relation to the point 3.52 of the corporate plan, and we will use our statutory power to challenge unacceptable levels of pollution. So in January 2020, 13 months after the commercial operation of the plant commenced on Avon Way, there was a permit which I think should have been scrutinised. Has anyone read or understood the permit so that you may understand how unacceptable levels of pollution may be defined in the immediate vicinity of the 49 megawatt store? I'd like to know, have any of you challenged or requested operational information to ensure that the operator, the UK Power Reserve Limited, is operating in line with the conditions of that permit? They're allowed to produce 190 milligrams per cubic metre of NOx pollutant for 1,500 hours per year, or approximately 30 hours per week. NOx is what brought about Junction 41, about the closure of that. It's a local pollution, NOx, and it's, you know, what action has been taken to ensure that they are operating responsibility within the conditions of the permit, given the highly toxic nature and allowable levels of pollution on the power plant on Avon Way. And the environmental permit, the same environmental permit, does not include any limits on CO, carbon monoxide, which, given the location of the power plant and its proximity to residential homes, is alarming. You know, carbon monoxide, if you're dealing with combustion gas, if it goes wrong, carbon monoxide is going to be released on quite a big scale. Has anyone challenged this? You know, this, I mean, I could go further, really. I think that's enough, you know, but I mean, the UK Power Reserve failed to apply for an environmental permit until 4 months after they'd started commercially operating. There was a failure to build the plant to agreed planning consent specifications, the stack height. And there's been a failure to deliver an acoustic noise attenuation fence 28 months after first commercial operation. 28 months. Now that's in an area between Sandfields East and Aberavon 4. Aberavon 4 is in the top 3% of deprived wards in the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. So I just find it astonishing, really. So we're coming up with these big statements. As I say, we will use our statutory power to challenge unacceptable levels of pollution. What are we doing about the store on Avon Way? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. Can I ask Director of Environment, Nicola Pierce, to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the permitting of this short-term operating reserve, it is a Natural Resources Wales responsibility. So we have permitting responsibilities for certain operations, but our responsibilities do not relate to this particular operation. It is an NRW controlled facility. So under the permit, they are required to undertake periodic monitoring of the emissions, and that's they being NRW, so that is their responsibility to do that. I have been advised by my colleagues within environmental health that there are no breaches of the air quality objectives within this particular area for NOx at the moment. We haven't had any concerns for a number of for a significant period of time. As you know, we have got an air quality management area in close proximity to the site. It is declared on the basis of PM10s as opposed to NOx or carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide even. The only air quality issue we have which has breached in this particular area is for PM10s, which is particulate matter, does not relate to NOx. We will, however, bring your concerns to our colleagues within NRW and request an update on when they undertook the last monitoring of that site in terms of compliance with the permit, and we will come back to you, Councillor. In terms of the enforcement side of things and the practices that the company have undertaken in the past, I share your concerns and anxiety. They have not been a particularly good company to deal with, and I concur with you that they secured planning permission for a development and proceeded to implement something which did not comply with the approved plans. And we have had sort of discussions and potentially disagreements with them over a period of time. Now, you may well be aware that we have granted them an amendment to their consent recently, which requires them to construct means of enclosure around the structures themselves, and this will have the dual purpose of mitigating any noise which comes from the facility, and it will also enclose it for visual amenity purposes because they've not built what they were supposed to, as I indicated earlier on. Now, there are time restrictions associated with that. The consent was granted in February of this year, and the consent requires the installation of that enclosure within 6 months of the date of the permission. So, you know, there is a time limit. So hopefully within 6 months of the 9th of February, we should have a means of enclosure which addresses the visual amenity, which addresses any noise nuisance from the facility. And to be clear on that, the noise, which you could argue is a pollutant as well, albeit a different type of pollutant or nuisance. That is the concerns relate only to nighttime activity, not to daytime activity. And at the moment, they're not allowed to operate the facility in the evening or in the night until these acoustic means of enclosure are in place. But,
Sorry, what did you just say then?
Councillor Hunt, can you let...
Yeah, they're not allowed to operate at night. And if I just provide detail in terms of what we consider to be night, is between 2,300 hours and 700 hours. They're not allowed to operate during those times according to their planning permission at the moment. Once they erect the acoustic barrier, which will also act as a visual impact improvement structure, then they will be allowed to operate during those hours. So I don't know if that clarifies your concerns, because I know I've slightly gone beyond your air quality issues.
Okay, Councillor Nigel Hunt, you've had the response. Would you like to come back in now?
Yeah, well, it's just with I know that the NRW issued that permit, and that's not our responsibility. But the question was asking is, has anyone challenged it? Because, you know, and limited research I've carried out really, but there's another power plant of a similar size that's more efficient than this plant that we're talking about in Baglan Bay. It's nowhere near houses, and yet their limit on their permit is 105 megagrams. I mean, this one's got almost double the level they're allowed, and this is 70 meters from children's bedrooms. I mean, I've got profound concerns about this. The acoustic fence, it's been operating for 28 months and we still don't have an acoustic fence. It's I'm staggered really. And with regards to the stations and whether they're breaching it, where are the stations? You say they're in close proximity. Can you tell me the locations of the measuring stations, please?
Chair, can I raise a point of order here, please?
Stop. Okay. Point of order has been called. So can I go to Councillor Aaron Woodcock, please?
So apologies, Chair. We're talking here now about the details of the operating of some plant. The agenda item in front of us is the plan. So, I'm sure that the points that Councillor Hunt is raising are very, very important indeed, but this is not the forum to raise them.
Well, okay, I'm bringing this up.
Okay. Can I just stop you there, Councillor Hunt?
I'm asking difficult questions about pollution.
Yeah. Can I just stop you there, Councillor Hunt? Okay. Our Councillor Woolcock, you've raised a point of order. I take on board your point of order, and I'll accept the point of order. So can I now go to Susan Paddison, please? Councillor Susan Paddison.
Thank you. I don't know whether you're going to allow this question and what you've just ruled, but I was just going to ask the Director of Environment, according to what is in the plan, are we using every means at our disposal that fall under the jurisdiction of Neath Talbot Council to reduce pollution?
Yes.
It's the same point of order, really, Chair.
Yeah, it is. Yes, I'm sorry, Councillor Paddison.
But there is a mechanism and a proper channel to go through to raise these very, very genuine concerns.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Paddison. Sorry.
Chair, I'm only just, the item is in the document, and I just wanted to confirm with the Director of Environment that what was in the plan, what stated in the plan, was correct, seeing as we're going to be voting on the plan.
Okay, right. Okay. Before I go to Nicola Pierce, I'm going to call Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal, just to clarify about the point of order.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harman. Yes, I'd agree in this sense. When we've got to look at the nature of the report in front of us, it's looking at the corporate plan. So I think a lot of the issues that we're talking about here, looking at project-specific related elements, I think are very important conversations ultimately to be had, but I think they have to sit outside this particular discussion that's happening here. So what I would encourage Councillor Hunt in that sense, given those issues, please do speak to Nicola Pierce and the team in that sense to hopefully provide you with all of that information ultimately that you would need as part of your discussions, but I think it has to sit somewhat outside of the discussion that's happening here.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor Harman.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Griffiths. Nicola Pierce, did you want to say anything further?
All I was going to say, Chair, was that we are continually challenging operators within the area to ensure that they complying with air quality objectives. We're working with industry, and we're also implementing our DARE strategy, which is a corporate document to improve decarbonisation and renewable energy objectives within the county borough. And I'll touch base with Councillor Hunt outside of the meeting to reassure him on what actions we are taking. Thank you, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, SPS. Right, okay, there are no further indication on this item. The recommendation is on page 51. This report is going to Cabinet today. I will need a proposer and a seconder to approve for this to go to Cabinet Board. Can I get a proposer?
Move, Chair.
Seconder, please.
Yes, I'll be the chair. Second.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next item we've decided to scrutinise is the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee item. We've had an interesting discussion about this at the pre-briefing. So can I ask the Chief Executive, Karen Jones, would you be kind enough to give us a brief overview of this particular report, and also if you could clarify the 3 recommendations which you are proposing to Cabinet today. So over to you, Ms. Karen Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off and I'll bring Craig in on the specifics of the recommendations as he's drafted them with monitoring officers across the region. So just going back a couple of steps, first of all, we had a member seminar a little while ago to run through the provisions in the Local Government and Elections Act, which, as you know, is now on the statute books. So while I know that there are very strong views about corporate joint committees, the reality of it is the Welsh Government has legislated to introduce them. And what we're trying to do with this report is to make sure the way in which we're progressing that work is visible to you as elected members It is a significant Welsh Government policy area, and as I said earlier, really, I know that members have got strong views about it, so I think it is really important that every step of the way in developing and implementing these arrangements, you've got full visibility of them. So in a nutshell, Chair, all we're seeking to do with this report today is to tell you that discussions need to start across the region to implement the legal provisions. There is a timescale for putting those arrangements in place. And what we're seeking in the report is to have the formal authority to commence that work. What I think would be helpful for me to say at this stage is that there are certain things that you have to build into the corporate joint committee arrangements because they're enshrined in the legislation and covered in the regulations. So we don't have a choice over some things as to whether they sit within the region or not. What we have agreed informally within the region is we'll set the corporate joint committees up in the first instance on the basis of what the legal minimum requirements are, and any additional powers or functions that we consider would better sit within the region would be decisions that would need to come back before you. But at this point in time, all we're seeking to do is to set up the governance and the structures to ensure us to meet ensure that we can meet the minimum legal requirements around the corporate joint committees. This is the first of a series of reports. There will be further detail that will need to come back to you on the detail of the governance, on funding, on scrutiny, on audit, the whole range of activities that are going to have to accompany these developments. All this report is seeking to do today is to give us the authority to formally start that work. So if I pause there, Chair, and ask Craig just to talk you through what the recommendations are intended to get at, and then more than happy between the two of us to take any questions the members have got.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Mr. Griffiths?
Thank you, Councillor Harman, and thank you, Chief Executive. So there are 3 recommendations ultimately which are built into this report today, and this same report is being presented to all other local authorities who will comprise the South Wales region for the Corporate Joint Committee. There's been an opportunity where we can apply ultimately for some grant funding to assist the council in the establishment of the CJC. So that could be sourcing some external legal advice or externalising additional support ultimately down the line as well. So the purpose of recommendation A is just to ask for your authority for us to make that application for the grant funding, and in the hope then once it's successful by Welsh Government we can accept it, whether that money then will come directly to ourselves to administer on behalf of the other authorities or whether it will go to one of our other partners who are part of it. So it's just then to have that necessary approval in place to make that application for the grant funding. The second recommendation then is just to give the delegated authority to the Chief Executive and the various officers when we're involved then to start having this dialogue with our neighbouring authorities as to what the remit, what the functions, what the look of the Corporate Joint Committee is ultimately going to be in accordance then with the legislation that's ultimately been set up, which we are obliged obviously to comply with, as Karen mentioned, but where we have some sort of discretion, we can go away and start having that discussion and try and find a regime that benefits then Neath and Talbot as part of it. And finally then, once all of that dialogue has taken place and we have a potential scenario going forward and we have a potential regime, that report then will be brought back to you all as members for you to consider it. You'll be able to see what the financial impacts ultimately will be as part of it, the workforce impacts and the general impacts then on the council in general before you make a decision then ultimately whether to support that and approve it going forward. But it's just overarching to give officers that authority to start having that dialogue, and then everything will be brought back to you to consider, debate and then determine whether you are happy to proceed on that basis. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths, for clarifying the recommendations. Can I ask Councillor Alan Woolcock to come in, please? Sorry, Arwin Woolcock.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Jones just referred to the seminar that was held a little while ago, and I attended that and expressed concern, as did other members, Chair, with regards to where we are going here. I mean, we know that there have been several failed attempts to create regional government or reorganisation of local government. And this seems to me, it comes across to me certainly as a means of gaining that regional government by the back door. And I'm extremely concerned about it. We're talking in this report about setting up a chief executive, a director of finance, its own funding, its own scrutiny. And yet, if you look at the bottom of page 212, when we are talking about scrutiny, and what will the 22 local authorities have as an input into this, if this is to go ahead, it states there, and I quote, a CJC will be accountable to its constituent principal councils, and CJC members will report back to their principal councils and respond to any questions and scrutiny. Great. Then it says, and this is the concerning bit, however, the CJC will have powers delegated to it and will make timely decisions without the need for ratification by its constituent principal councils. That is very, very concerning, Chair. I'm not at all happy with what it says there, as well as the issues I covered previously. We did have a lengthy debate in pre-briefing, as you quite rightly say, about this, and the feeling there was that we come up with an amendment to the current recommendations put in front of us today. Recommendations, incidentally, that I consider, in reading them, to be too final, if I can put that word on it. Just to end there, Chair, because I don't want to hold up what other members, because I know that a number of other members wish to come in on this. But turning to the recommendations, if they are to go as they are after this discussion, Mr. Griffiths, perhaps I could point out to you, it looks as if there is a typo there on recommendation 33A, right at the end there, where it says councils or participating authority in the Swansea Wales CJC. I think there's a typo there. I think that should read South West Wales, yeah? But the points I made earlier are the ones that concern me, Chair, and I have written an amendment if members decide that they wish to hear that and go ahead with it. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
Okay, no problem. So you've indicated, Councillor Woolcock, that you are to propose an amendment to the recommendation. So I will come back to you at the end. Councillor Sharon Friga, please.
Thank you, Chair. I completely concur with Councillor Woolcock. I have grave concerns about this. And at a time when all our officers are in the recovery period from this pandemic, or we're actually still in the pandemic, and yet we're going to do work which we consider, or it appears that councillors consider, is not needed, completely not needed. And yet there's legislation, as you say, Karen, which gives power to these CJCs, and yet the groundwork hasn't been done. So, you know, it seems that the power's given without the governance coming forward, without any of the audit, the finance details coming forward. And to agree those recommendations now, I do feel that they are too far ahead, that we need to have perhaps a full discussion at council after you've been involved in more discussions about the plans, because I think we need to send a clear message of where we stand at the moment. And I, for one, would like to hear Councillor Woolcock's amendment. Thank you.
Okay, next on the list is Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know I wholeheartedly agree with this, but the previous speakers call me cynical if you wish, but the thing is, the many botched attempts at government reorganisation over the years, and I just feel that this is a thin end of the wedge, and I just feel it's a government reorganisation in another way.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Suzanne Paddison, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask the question of Craig Griffiths, please. The whole feeling of these ABC recommendations is that discussions take place and come back to us. I would like to ask, what part of that then could we object to at that stage? Could we object to all of it, or could we object to just some of it, or have we no power to object even at that stage when they have had the discussions? Because if Welsh Government have legislated, is the council's hands tied because of the legislation? I mean, as much as we don't like the law, there are other laws that we have to abide by which that we don't like. But so can I have your professional legal opinion as to how much of this is ever going to be within the council's hands? Thank you.
Mr. Griffith.
Of course, Councillor Patterson, Chair, thank you for that. The majority of the CJC elements are prescribed by law, so there's going to be very little areas probably that we do have significant discretion ultimately on. So when you look at the areas which are subject to the Corporate Joint Committee, strategic planning, transport, economic well-being, all of those elements are required ultimately to be part of a Corporate Joint Committee. Similarly, that we have to have scrutiny, we have to have governance and audit committees. The membership is ultimately set in some ways, but there will be ad hoc flexibilities that ultimately come in it in different ways. So, for example, the constitution of scrutiny committees, the number of members who could be involved, the level of co-option from other bodies who could ultimately be part on it. So, in amongst the framework in which we are working, there will be certain elements which will be up to constituent authorities ultimately to decide. So the aim of the dialogue that will be had is obviously to design a system that officers perhaps believe then could be of the appropriate consideration and reflects then the best interest of what Neath Talbot would be in this particular case. And then with those flexibilities, we could report back to you as members so you can make the consideration then ultimately whether you are satisfied in that regard. So there will be elements you won't be able to make any sort of decision on, but there will be the occasional element, yes, you do have some discretion then in that sense as well.
If I may, Chair,
yes.
I get the feeling here that the council's hands are tied with regards to these joint committees. However much we may balk at the idea, in the end, we're going to have to do as we're told. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that everybody's covered it pretty well, and I agree with Arwin on this, Councillor Woolcock. What I want to ask Craig is, we keep on about legislative powers. The seminar had the same mood, same feeling, same outcome as the scrutiny today. So, at what point were we able to say no to Welsh Government to make this legislation then? Because that's probably the key. This process should have been within our laps as local authorities across Wales from the offset. It should have been from the beginning, so that they had the mood of all the authorities across Wales before making the legislative powers to be proposed here today. Now, what I want to ask is, I still agree with Arwin, is that even if we do recommend or support Arwin's amendment, the Cabinet, of course, will make the decision anyway. What would that do? Would that send a message across to those that are going to decide? Would it restrict us if Cabinet agreed with us this afternoon? Would that then mean that we as a local authority would be able to not participate, even though it's legislative? Because my understanding from legal, we have got no choice, as Suzanne mentioned. So if we have no choice, how do we make our views clearly known this afternoon that we are not happy at all by supporting Arwin's amendment and telling our Cabinet this? Will that have some sort of time at the right appropriate place so that they know our feelings? So sorry, there's a mixed bag there, but that is mine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Karen Jones, please.
It probably might help, Chair, if I just come in to answer some elements of it, because Councillor Hunt is quite right. The time to influence it was before the legislation was enacted. And all I can say is that this has been in the system for a number of years now, and there have been quite heated discussions within the Welsh Local Government Association with policy officials in Welsh Government and with ministers, because there is probably a general view within local government that this is diluting the role of local government, as a number of you have said this afternoon, and people do not like it. Now, regardless of the views that local government has put forward, the Welsh Government has obviously secured sufficient support in the Senedd to actually put these arrangements on the statute book. And a number of the arrangements for corporate joint committees are very prescriptive. So there isn't a choice as to whether you have a chief executive, for example, for the CJC. How you appoint the chief executive and how you fund it is open for discussion. But the law is quite clear that you have to appoint a number of statutory officers. The corporate joint committees, as you know, have got the powers to employ their own staff. There are certain functions that we must transfer and locate within the CJC, but then there are flexibilities, as Craig has said, around the way in which the scrutiny arrangements are set up, and so on and so forth. I suppose what I'm trying to do this afternoon with Craig, in knowing the strength of feeling around the chamber about these proposals, is to say we've got to start doing this work. And what we want to do is to do it in a very transparent and visible way, so you are clear about what's happening at each step along the way, and at every opportunity you've got to shape the arrangements within what the law permits. You've got an opportunity to debate that and to give us, or to give the lead, I should say, some clear steer about what you would prefer, so we can take that into our dialogue with our colleagues in the rest of the region. So I do absolutely hear what you say in terms of your strength of view about the regional arrangements. But if you want to change those now, you would need to change the law, is the reality of it. So, you know, that's probably best taken up through political channels, I would imagine. But for now, what we've got to do is start to actually do the work to put them into place. So I hope that, hopefully, Chair, that gives a little bit of an insight as to what's been going on while the legislation was developing, because there's been a lot of debate about it and a lot of representation, but we've ended up where we've ended up with it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. Councillor Freegard, you've indicated.
Yeah, taking on those points, Karen, we'd be actually doing it to ourselves, and we'd be seen to be doing it to ourselves. We've had no consultation about this whatsoever. And I really think we need to take up the point that you make about changing the law and going down political avenues. But agreeing to those recommendations now, we're actually saying, yeah, it's okay. It's okay to do it, and it's not okay. It really isn't okay. So
Okay.
I still would like to hear Councillor Wilcox's amendment. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Freegard. Okay, before I go to Councillor Arwen Woolcock for the amendment that he's proposing, Councillor Keogh, I've noticed you've indicated.
I put my hand up and it's like somebody's been lowering it, so I don't know.
Right, okay.
I've forgotten what I was going to say now. To me, it's just creating another level of bureaucracy yet again. You know, it's obviously that the Welsh Government is not listening to any of the local authority, not listening at all. It's driving its own agenda. It's doing what it wants to do, not what we want to do.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Keogh. Councillor Susan Paddison, I need to make progress now, so can you be brief?
Yes, I will be brief. Thank you, Chair. It's to Craig again. If we recommended to Council, to Cabinet, that we weren't happy with this and we changed it in some way, should Cabinet be of a similar mind? What penalties or problems would that cause from Welsh Government? Would this council be in a difficult position then with regards to Welsh Government? As you know, what could they do, basically?
Well, as it stands at the moment, Councillor Patterson, we're obliged, obviously, that we have to have these corporate joint committees and we have to have the process in place by a certain date. So going back, what the recommendation in the report ultimately is, it's not to agree any aspect of the corporate joint committee yet or any information as to what its constitutional makeup is going to be. All this is a report that basically gives delegation to officers just to start having those discussions as to how it would be for Neath Talbot, so we could then bring those discussions back to you to check that you would be happy in that first instance. So any sort of recommendation probably wouldn't necessarily be able to change any position going forward, because we are obliged to be part of these. And what we're just trying to do here is get in early to start having that dialogue, to start making sure that the representations and views in NPT are carrying through these process, and we have a deal and an arrangement which we then are happy and content with as an authority, making the best of the legislation that's now upon us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Okay, I now move on to Councillor Alwyn Wilcock. Members, you can see the recommendation on page 222, item 30, sorry, number 33, A, B, and C. Councillor Wilcock, can you now tell us exactly what's the amendment that you wish to propose, please?
Thank you, Chair. Before I get to that, very briefly, I do appreciate your indulgence in this. I think a lot of this is to do, and this is where this council's policy of having pre-scrutiny is far better than the other councils that are involved here of having post-scrutiny, because they're only scrutinising this after the event. If this had been scrutinised before the event, it would fall in line exactly with what Mrs. Jones said earlier and what Councillor Frieger has said earlier. Before I get to the wording of my amendment, then, Chair, I can say this as well, that we can only recommend to Cabinet today. So if we were to recommend an amendment, it's up to Cabinet then to consider the recommendations as they are. But if they do ultimately do that, can they please take on board with the wording of the amendment that I'm about to propose? And incidentally, I think the wording of my amendment falls in line with what Mr. Griffiths told us earlier on. And the wording is this, Chair, that delegated authority be granted to the Chief Executive in consultation with the leader to further explore the merit of establishing a South Wales CJC, and that this council's concerns about regional government are expressed. A report is then brought back to full council for full discussion. That would be my amendment, Chair. As I say, it's for Cabinet to take a final decision, but should they decide to accept the recommendations as they are, can they please, if this amendment is agreed, take on board the concerns expressed by Scrutiny Committee this afternoon? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Griffiths, can I ask you for clarification on this? The recommended amendment that Councillor Woolcock has proposed today, does that fit within the constitution of the council? And can I also ask you, as a Cabinet Scrutiny Committee, how do we now move with this recommendation?
Could I ask Councillor Woolcock just to repeat that, please? I started writing it down, but I missed certain elements, just so I could hear it.
Yes, certainly.
Sorry, Mr. Griffiths. That delegated authority be granted to the Chief Executive, in brackets, in consultation with the leader, okay, to further explore the merit of establishing a South Wales CJC, okay, and that this council's concerns about regional government are expressed.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Woolcock, Councillor Harman. If
I could take... And the last bit, I don't know, did you catch the last bit, Craig?
Could you just repeat that again,
a full report is then brought back to full council for full discussion.
Okay, there we go. Right, if I could take three of those elements in turn. So if we can look at the concept first of future merit. The problem with that is we are obliged at the moment to have a corporate joint committee. in that sense. So the future merit of having a discussion on a corporate joint committee, I don't think would be valid ultimately to put forward on this occasion. If I could take the latter element then with regards to a report being back to full council, the decision ultimately for a corporate joint committee in the most part would be an executive decision, not a full council decision in part. So although reports could go to full council for information, the decision making in the first instance would be a cabinet decision that would be made. What I would suggest then is to find a way to express obviously the concerns that members had today. Would it be advantageous that if we went with the additional recommendations which are in the document as drafted, but we add an additional recommendation D, that representations of councils and today's scrutiny committee be forwarded to Welsh Government potentially, so members are ultimately able to consider it? Because the debate of having the future merits of forming a CJC, I think that time has now passed because we are obliged ultimately to have one. But I think it's important that the views of the scrutiny committee are taken into account. So if we record that view with Welsh Government, that may be the best way to try and satisfy those elements. I don't know if the Chief Executive, is there anything you'd like to add to my suggestions there?
I think, Chair, if I can come in, as I said earlier, really, the point of the report today is to say there is now a legal obligation on the council to put these arrangements into place, and they are very prescriptive. So we, as I say, come in here formally to say, can we now start that work? But I do hear what members have said. We've made those views ourselves, and we known earlier in the process that people are concerned about the impact implications of these regional structures on the role of local government. And I think it's quite legitimate that those views are recorded and those are conveyed on in whatever way members think is appropriate.
Okay. Councillor Woolcock, please.
Yeah, to move progress, Chair, I'm happy with that. It's as long as our point can be made forcefully within the content of the as an addition, sorry, to the recommendations. Then I'm noting the typographical error that I mentioned earlier on as well. I would be happy with that, Chair.
So, Councillor Woolcock, am I correct that you're withdrawing your amendment?
Not withdrawing it entirely, Chair. I am leaving it there in line with what Mr. Griffiths has just advised.
Right, okay. Craig Griffiths, would you clarify that part for me, please?
If I just come back then to give some sort of clarification as to what it could say, the recommendation then could obviously be what we have in paragraphs 33A, B and C, but an additional recommendation made that representations that have been highlighted in today's Cabinet Scrutiny Committee be notified to Welsh Government to ensure that the views of Neath Talbot Council members are taken into account.
Okay, that's great. Keep that in mind, members. I've got some indication now before I move to the recommendation. Councillor Hunt, please, Steve Hunt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was only going to say that in line with Alwyn's amendment and Craig's changing of a recommendation, I just wanted clarity. Does that part go forward in Alwyn's amendment added to that, or is he suggesting it now goes part of the recommendation? Only for us to be clear on what we're voting for, because I would be supporting Councillor Woolcock on his amendment with that additional information added. However, if Craig is saying that it now could be part of the proposal at this meeting, then that would clear it up completely. So that's all I wanted, Chair. Clarification. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Freegard, please.
Thanks, Chair. Can I listen to Craig's response first, please, Chair?
Okay.
Okay, what I would suggest then, Chair, is that when Councillor Woolcock is ready, he proposes the recommendation with the amendment which I mentioned. So that would be a new paragraph D, allowing for the representations then to be put forward in the manner I suggested.
Okay, on that note then, Councillor Aaron Woolcock, could you please propose your recommendation?
Chair, can I just ask then something on to Craig? Given what's been said, and clearly given the mood of this scrutiny committee, we need to have somewhere in there that we completely disagree, because we're only agreeing to those recommendations on the fact that now this proposal will go in as D, but we completely disagree with them, and we're doing it under duress purely because it's legislation. And I think we need to have strong wording in there so that the message is loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
okay.
Chair.
I've already called Councillor Aaron Woolcock. Craig, do you want to add anything before, or no?
No, Chair, there's nothing I can add, but we can make sure with the full views that have been included
Taken
today.
on board, yeah, okay. Councillor Woolcock, would you
Yeah,
propose?
I'm happy to move then, Chair, with the addition of the paragraph that Mr Griffiths has just kindly provided us with, and the amendment to the typographical error in 33A. I move, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I get a seconder, please?
I'm happy
I'll
to
second,
second.
Chair.
Can I get a proposer, sorry?
I
I'm happy to
propose,
second.
Chair.
And a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. So that ends the that particular item. Can I now, members, take you back to the Cabinet scrutiny agenda? Okay, number 6 on the agenda is scrutiny forward work program for 2020 to 2021. This forward work program is for noting. Do members have anything to add? Sharon, you've got your hand raised? Or is that a...
Sorry, it's a legacy hand.
Okay, yeah. Can I ask Democratic Service Officer Chloe, is there anything else you wish to add to this item?
No, Chair, nothing further to add on the forward work programme, just for noting.
Okay. The next item is the item number 7, urgent item. There are no urgent item. As mentioned earlier, we will not be scrutinising any item on the Cabinet Finance sub-agenda today, and therefore I will now close the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance.